In 2019, Harmon Montgomery, a little girl just 7 years old, disappeared in Manchester, New Hampshire, in a case that at the time seemed like just another statistic with little significance in local news. Her story, dark and marked by a childhood of neglect and abandonment, would unfold quietly, but Harmon's fate was far from being a simple tragedy of a lost child. What started as another missing persons case in the city of Manchester would turn into a complex criminal investigation involving secrets and lies, bringing to light a much darker reality than anyone could have predicted. The morning of May 3rd, 2019, when Harmon disappeared, began like any other. The typical heat of early summer hung over Manchester, and the strong northern winds gave the day an oppressive and heavy feel. The city, with its decaying suburban look, bore the scars of neglect and a lack of resources. Harmon, like so many other girls in the city, played in the street. The world around her seemed insignificant, an indifferent extension of the neglect that defined her life. She was alone as usual. It was around 9:30 a.m., and Adam and Crystal Montgomery, her parents, were caught up in their own problems. Adam, still struggling with addiction, and Crystal maintaining a facade of normalcy, although the increasing destruction within the family was becoming more and more obvious. Harmon was a cheerful girl, with curious eyes and a shy smile that reflected a resilient energy. However, despite her personality challenging the harsh reality she lived in, her life was far from easy. Adam and Crystal, both involved with drugs and self-destructive behaviors, couldn't provide their daughter with the minimum attention she needed. Her days were marked by fights and neglect. The home environment was, to put it mildly, a reflection of the complete emotional and financial disarray of her parents. Adam's erratic behavior, combined with Crystal's disorders, made any attempt to maintain a healthy family dynamic a lost cause. The house they lived in, an old wooden structure in the outskirts, was filled with filth and neglect. Although neighbors often saw Harmon running barefoot in the streets, always alone, few cared or questioned the state of her life. What seemed like a childhood abandoned by everyone, including those who should theoretically protect her, ended up becoming an unfolding tragedy. That morning, Harmon didn't know she was about to disappear. She simply walked away from home, as she often did, and went outside to play in the street. A common routine, a normal day for a child, but for her, it was a silent prelude to disaster. Around 10 a.m., when Crystal finally woke up and realized Harmon wasn't home, panic took hold of her. However, the initial search was vague, with no real effort made. Adam, for his part, never showed any real concern about his daughter's disappearance. Once again, the parents' behavior matched the indifference Harmon had experienced throughout her life. During the first few weeks, the local police treated the case with the coldness of a common disappearance. The lack of evidence, the absence of witnesses, and Harmon's disorganized life combined to create a scenario where her disappearance seemed inevitable to those close to the family. There was little public outcry, no prominent investigative efforts. The parents, individuals with criminal backgrounds and recurring problems with the law, were quickly ruled out as suspects. For many, Harmon was just another lost girl, another victim of a system that had failed her from the start. Even after weeks of searches, nothing suggested that anything truly abnormal had occurred. However, the case didn't die, as many had expected. In 2021, an unexpected detail came to light. An anonymous tip, a lead from an unknown informant, would change everything. The tip claimed that Harmon had been a victim of physical abuse and that the truth about her disappearance went far beyond what authorities had initially imagined. What seemed like a fleeting escape from a lonely girl on the street now revealed itself as a deadly enigma, a turning point for investigators who would ultimately reopen the case. But what would be uncovered in the following weeks was not just the fate of a missing child, but a web of lies, abuse, and deeply buried secrets. Adam and Crystal, Harmon's parents, became the prime suspects. Investigations began to uncover a much darker and more distorted picture than anyone had imagined. Adam, a man sinking into addiction and crime, seemed to hold the key to finding the answer. His story, marked by destructive behaviors and his complex relationship with his daughter, was becoming increasingly important to understanding what had really happened to Harmon. Adam, who had been an absent presence in his daughter's life, was now at the center of the investigation. His refusal to cooperate with detectives and his cold, evasive behavior during interrogations made him a difficult puzzle to solve. It seemed he was hiding behind a wall of lies, manipulating others, and above all, denying any responsibility. As the investigation progressed, the case of Harmon Montgomery slowly unearthed a plot of abuse, neglect, and violence that stretched far beyond their small town. Harmon's disappearance became a tragic milestone, not only for the pain it caused but for the way it exposed the flaws of the justice system and the disintegration of a family on the brink of ruin. What seemed like a search for answers was transforming into a race against time, where every clue revealed more shadows, more mysteries, and the irreparable pain of a lost life. The figure of Harmon Montgomery, although absent in many of the key moments of her own story, began to emerge through the memories and perceptions of those who knew her. Despite being a girl who lived amidst neglect, abandonment, and familial decay, Harmon was above all a ray of light in the darkness. Her innate joy, her laughter amidst the chaos, and her ability to smile even under the most adverse circumstances made her a complex and moving figure. The girl not only represented a victim of circumstances, but also a little warrior who, in her own way, clung to what was left of her humanity. Through the eyes of those who knew her, Harmon is described as a lively, energetic girl. It's said that she often walked the streets with a ball in her hands, barefoot, but with an attitude that defied the harshness of her environment. That image of the little girl running through the streets of Manchester, seeking an escape in her game, is what remains in the memory of those who saw her grow up in a home where love was scarce. However, Harmon's story isn't told only through her laughter and curiosity. As the investigation progressed, her life was revealed in a much darker context, one where maternal and paternal love were empty concepts, and where the safety of a protected childhood was an unattainable luxury. Crystal, Harmon's mother, is portrayed as a broken woman, trapped in a web of addictions and destructive behaviors that made her ability to care for her daughter minimal. Crystal wasn't a bad person, but the life she had chosen, or rather the one she had been dealt, had left her on the brink of self-destruction. She found herself stuck in a vicious cycle that seemed endless. Despite everything, Crystal tried in her own way to stay connected with Harmon. At times, authorities and neighbors recalled how Crystal would bring her snacks or try to be there, albeit in a way that was clearly insufficient. Her desire to be a functional mother constantly clashed with the shadow of her own inner demons, and the family circumstances didn't make it easier for her to provide her daughter with what she truly needed. Despite her limitations, Crystal tried to find a way to remain in Harmon's life, though her efforts were always fragmented and disorganized. Her bond with Harmon seemed based on a constant struggle between love and the inability to express it effectively. In some ways, Crystal felt that the only way to redeem her life was by clinging to her daughter. But the reality was that she was falling apart and couldn't provide her with the emotional stability Harmon required. Throughout the investigation, Crystal was seen with a mixture of sympathy and revulsion. No one denied that there was something genuine in her intention to stay close to Harmon, but her actions, always clouded by addiction and chaos, placed her at the center of a more complex story than that of a mother simply worried about her daughter. Adam, Harmon's father, is the most controversial and dark character in this story. Over the years, his behavior had been erratic and destructive. Adam was a man caught in a spiral of self-destruction driven by drugs, alcohol, and a series of personal decisions that had distanced him from anything resembling a normal life. His face, marked by years of abuse, transformed every time he fell into one of his fits of rage or despair. Despite all this, Adam kept trying in a dysfunctional way to claim his daughter and regain custody of Harmon, an attempt that placed him at the center of police attention during the investigation. Many times, Adam presented himself as the man who had the right to be a good father, a man who had paid for his mistakes and wanted a chance to redeem himself. However, his actions always contradicted his words. In his fight for custody, Adam began manipulating situations to his advantage, showing a facade of repentance while still immersed in the same destructive cycle. He presented himself to the police and investigators with an apparent attitude of innocence, acting as if he had nothing to do with Harmon's fate, although the evidence was beginning to pile up against him. Throughout interviews with investigators, Adam proved to be skilled at manipulating the situation to his benefit, always dodging questions, or, when things became uncomfortable, showing a cold and evasive attitude. His complete denial of any involvement in Harmon's disappearance revealed a mind more astute and calculating than many had thought. His behavior was that of a man who, though everything was against him, knew how to plant doubt and deflect attention, making it harder for detectives to uncover the truth. The conflict between Adam and Crystal, their fight for Harmon's custody, and their dysfunctional relationship became the center of the investigation. Crystal tried to be a support for Harmon, but her actions, though with good intentions, were clouded by her inability to stay away from addiction. Adam, on the other hand, manipulated every conversation, every encounter with the police, creating a web of lies that further complicated the case. The tension between the parents, the growing mistrust of Adam, and Crystal's inability to offer Harmon a stable life plunged the case into a spiral of doubts and contradictions. As the investigation advanced, it revealed more about Adam and Crystal's internal demons. Both were responsible in some way for Harmon's suffering, but neither seemed willing to fully admit their guilt. The love-hate relationship between the parents amidst their own personal destruction made it clear that the truth about what really happened to Harmon would be much harder to uncover than it seemed. As the days passed and the investigation into the disappearance of Harmon Montgomery progressed, the complications became increasingly evident. Every step the detectives took toward the truth seemed to uncover a new layer of mystery, and as details were revealed, the interrogations and evidence began to raise more questions than answers. Adam, who had initially been considered a secondary figure in the case, became a constant source of frustration for the investigators. From the start of his interrogation, Adam showed a distant and evasive attitude. Instead of showing the supposed anguish of a concerned father, his behavior became more and more bizarre. His coldness and refusal to cooperate with the police only heightened the suspicions. During the first interrogations, Adam was as manipulative as ever, dodging questions and offering vague answers that contributed nothing concrete to the case. The police tried to extract information from his version of events, but each attempt met with a wall of silence. His answers were so calculated that instead of clarifying things, they only planted more doubts. At many points, it seemed that Adam was more interested in controlling the narrative of the investigation than in providing any useful leads. Frustration grew among the detectives. They had the feeling that Adam was not just hiding something, but was also willing to do whatever it took to evade the truth. The hours of interviews became a battle of attrition, with Adam giving the impression that the more they pressed, the more he clung to his distorted version of events. Physical evidence and testimonies didn't match his account, and despite his manipulation, it was becoming increasingly clear that Adam's behavior and his story were inconsistent with the facts that had been uncovered so far. However, the case seemed to be at a standstill. Adam, despite being the prime suspect, never made a clear confession, nor made any mistakes that could definitively incriminate him. At the same time, Crystal, Harmon's mother, who had initially been seen as a peripheral figure, began to emerge in a new light, with a much more direct involvement in the disappearance of her daughter. Investigations revealed that Crystal had not only been absent during the days leading up to the disappearance, but may also have been involved in hiding crucial information about Harmon's whereabouts. Although Crystal didn't seem as manipulative or evasive as Adam, her attitude and actions indicated that she had something to hide. Detectives began to suspect that she had played a key role in Harmon's disappearance, possibly by withholding important details or even covering up her husband's actions. Crystal's potential complicity could be even more dangerous, as she was obscuring the truth and making it harder to solve the case. As the investigations continued, the tension mounted. The detectives delved deeper into the web of lies, with each new piece of information further complicating the picture they were building. However, the sense that something crucial was missing in understanding the case was palpable. Leads kept emerging, but nothing was conclusive, and time passed without a definitive answer. Every clue seemed to be just a distant echo of a truth still hidden. The police decided to step up their efforts, doubling down on interviews and reanalyzing the evidence, but no significant breakthroughs were found. Then came the anonymous tip that would change the course of the investigation. The call, made to the emergency hotline, claimed that Harmon hadn't only been a victim of neglect, but also of physical abuse by Adam. According to the source, Harmon had suffered physical violence before her disappearance, which gave detectives a new direction to pursue. This revelation shifted the focus of the case, giving it an unexpected twist that reignited the investigators' hopes. A thorough review of Harmon's medical records was initiated, searching for evidence of past injuries or signs of abuse. The news of physical abuse revived the memories of those who knew the family. Neighbors and acquaintances of Adam and Crystal recalled that it wasn't the first time someone had suspected that Harmon was being mistreated. There had been rumors that Adam, in his moments of rage, had physically assaulted Harmon on several occasions, though it had never been made public. These testimonies began to intertwine with the physical evidence, and the police began to build a clearer picture of the violence the girl might have been exposed to. The investigation intensified further. The police gained access to the call, records of the parents and extended family, searching for any clue that could link Adam to the abuse. Evidence revealed patterns of behavior, previous violent incidents, and a highly dysfunctional family environment. Detectives focused on the physical evidence showing that Harmon had been beaten, something consistent with the anonymous tip. But even with the evidence of physical abuse, nothing seemed strong enough to pinpoint Harmon's location. The girl was still missing, and while the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, the resolution was still out of reach. As the investigation progressed, the sense of desperation grew. Every time a new lead emerged, it seemed as though the truth was slipping further away, as if it were a mystery that would never be completely solved. The evidence pointed to Adam as the prime suspect, but his manipulative behavior left the detectives feeling trapped in a cycle of frustration. Despite the increasingly evident signs of physical abuse, the questions about Crystal's involvement continued to linger in the air, unresolved. The case kept growing in complexity, with every new discovery pushing the investigation further into uncertainty. The fear that no definitive answer would ever be found about Harmon's whereabouts became a constant shadow over the investigation, which continued without any imminent closure. Detectives knew they were close, but the road to the truth remained long and tortuous, full of emotional obstacles, manipulations, and secrets that refused to come to light. After months of interrogations, evidence, and leads that seemed to go nowhere, the investigation into Harmon Montgomery's disappearance reached a critical point. The detectives had finally gathered enough evidence to confront Adam directly. The pressure had mounted to the point where he could no longer maintain the facade of indifference. However, what happened next was a scene that revealed the complexity of his character and the manipulation he was capable of. It was in a dark interrogation room, with the detective staring intently at Adam, that he finally broke. His words were hesitant, disconnected, as if he were trying to find a way to admit his guilt without truly doing so. For a long time, Adam had maintained the same defensive posture. He denied any knowledge of what had really happened to Harmon, despite the evidence. But that afternoon, something changed. He began to admit his responsibility in the case, but he did so in a way that wasn't entirely clear. Yes, I had something to do with it. I was responsible, but I didn't mean to, damn it, were some of the halting words that escaped his mouth. It was clear that guilt was consuming him, but also that despite everything, his need to manipulate the narrative was still present. Adam tried to control how he would be perceived, even in this crucial moment. He wasn't willing to give a full confession, nor take complete responsibility for his actions. Instead of delivering the truth clearly, he continued to feed doubt, deflecting attention from the most horrific facts. Every time the detectives showed him new evidence or a statement that further implicated him, he responded with evasions, unsupported explanations, trying to downplay his involvement. Adam became a baffling enigma for the investigators. Guilty, but at the same time unable to fully admit it. Adam's partial revelation opened the door for detectives to start reconstructing the sequence of events in a clearer way, though the path remained complicated. The evidence of physical abuse aligned with Adam's half-confession, and more details began to emerge, suggesting that Harmon had been subjected to constant violence before disappearing. The image of the terrified girl, possibly beaten and ultimately abandoned by her own father, became even more heartbreaking. Finally, after weeks of confrontations with Adam and a thorough analysis of all the evidence gathered, the detectives were able to present a solid case. Adam was arrested and charged with murder, a step that had seemed so distant in the early days of the investigation, but now was inevitable. The charge was based not only on the partial confession, but also on the testimonies of neighbors, physical evidence of abuse, and the fact that Adam had been an active and destructive presence in Harmon's life. The murder charge, while direct, was in reality a sentence that could not bring the girl back to life. The agony of the family, the unsettling details of the case, and the constant question of whether Harmon had suffered irreparably before she disappeared remained present and unresolved. However, there was something crucial missing. Harmon's body was never found. Despite intensive searches, interrogations, and Adam's indictment, the girl remained missing. The lack of a complete closure, the absence of her body, left the investigation marked by a sense of incompleteness. No one could provide a clear answer about what had really happened in the final days of Harmon's life, nor where her body was. In the minds of the investigators and the community, that emptiness became an open wound that could never fully heal. The case, despite Adam's conviction and imprisonment, didn't bring peace. The resolution of the case seemed unattainable. Justice had been partial, but the truth remained incomplete. Harmon's death, though ultimately attributed to her father, continued to be shrouded in shadows. The murder charge brought some closure to the judicial process, but deep down it couldn't undo the irreparable. A life cut short, a girl who had been brutally torn from this world and who even after her death remained an enigma. The case left a painful reflection on the justice system and its failings, about how neglect and abuse can form a cycle of destruction that ultimately leaves no space for redemption. The criminal justice system could punish Adam, but it couldn't repair the damage done to Harmon. The question of whether the institutions, the child protection system, and society in general failed to protect her lingered in the air. The horror that hid behind this case was a reflection of a society that too often ignores the signs of abuse and neglect until it's too late. Thus, the resolution of this case became a complete tragedy, not only because of the death of a little girl, but also because of the sense that justice, while unyielding with the guilty, could never return what had been lost. And although the court convicted Adam of murder, the full truth of what happened to Harmon Montgomery was never fully reached. A child's life was lost, and with it the answers her story needed to find peace.